Hello, everybody. Hello, hello. Step right in. Step right in. We're about to start. Welcome to the stream. Just want to make sure you guys can hear me and see me. What's going on, everybody? We got excellent connection, which is good. Okay. Should be good to go right now. Boom. Okay. Here we go. Here we go. Welcome, everybody. Brian is about to join us in a second. I hope everybody's having a nice day today and you're ready for some popcorn. And we're about to hit the ground running. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Hello, everybody. Happy whatever day it is, wherever you are. Saturday for me.
Festivus for me.
Ready for the airing of the grievances.
That was the best part of Seinfeld.
I know.
Okay.
Every year we talk about
it. The feats of strength. Remember that?
Yeah, I forgot about that part.
Yeah, the feats of strength. Okay. Brian, we're here to talk about whatever is going on right now. It's very hard for me to compare that situation we have right now to anything we've ever seen before, at least in recent history. So give us kind of from your standpoint, your viewpoint, the summary of prior chapters that if you're just stepping into this right now, what have you missed over the past year?
Well, I think, Tom, first of all, thanks for having me. And I think your viewers have heard me say this before, but it just keeps becoming more clear how true it is that we're now in the midst of a third global conflict. I believe it's already started. I believe it started no later than when Putin went into Crimea in 2014. And I think you have on one side what I would just call Western democracy, and I include Israel in that, and Singapore, and not Singapore maybe, but Australia, Japan. So I call it Western democracy, but I really mean all the allied democracies on the one hand. And on the other hand, obviously Russia, China, mullahs in Iran, more minor players like North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba maybe. And this is a conflict that's going to last, I think, for decades. And the real question is the West going to be able to win it over that time period through diplomacy and cyber warfare and autonomous weapons and AI and basically technology and ingeniousness of our people? Or are we going to fight a hot war, meaning, firing missiles at each other, fighting with ships, fighting on land? And so I firmly believe that the genocidal Russian invasion of Ukraine on the one hand and the genocidal attacks by the Iranian mullah-sponsored Hezbollah and Hamas are both very early battles in that war. And a lot of whether we're going to have to fight, when we're going to have to send Americans and Canadians and Australians and Japanese to literally fight in a war, really depends a lot on what happens in Israel and what happens in Ukraine. Because the one person that's watching this intently is Xi Jinping. And I think a lot of his decision about whether to try to take Taiwan and expand in the what he calls the South China Sea is going to depend on how he sees the resolve and the capability of the West in these two wars. And because I think, accurately or not, the Chinese see Israel and Ukraine as client states of the United States, because, as you know, that's just the way Putin looks at things. He doesn't think I don't believe he thinks in terms of allies. He thinks in terms of other countries that are subjugated and will do whatever they're told. And that's just not the relationship that we have. But I think both Russia and China are going to judge their next moves by what we and our allies do in these two conflicts. So I think we're in a very, very important and dangerous time.
He has the classic KGB view on the Middle East.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as we know, the so-called Muslim resistance was essentially created by the Soviet KGB. And Mahmoud Abbas, who's still around in the Palestinian Authority, was a KGB asset, probably still is a Russian asset. And of course, Yasser Arafat was fully recruited, essentially created by them. And so they view the Middle East as the gift that keeps on giving, an unending way to create chaos and sap the resources of the Western democracies.
It's funny to me how the CLO, BLO, and the PLO were all created by the same blueprint by
Yeah.
your colleagues from the other side of the ocean, and yet the PLO managed to outlive its creators.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think trying to draw a differentiation between the Soviet Union and the way Putin runs Russia, and not in terms of the economy, but the way he wants to reconstitute the empire is basically the same. That's why I always laugh when people say, "Well, why do we need NATO? The Soviet Union's gone." Well, they just changed their name, right? They changed their name back to Russia,
Have you
and
seen
they're at
that
least as threatening
Simpsons
as the
episode?
Soviets ever were.
Sorry, sorry to talk over you. We have a little bit of a delay, but
No problem.
have you seen that Simpsons episode where there's like the parade, and
Uh-uh.
then they changed in the 1990s. They changed the parade to a bunch of dolls and Mickey Mouse and stuff, and then like
Yeah.
the tanks come out of it. Now we were just lying. We're back.
Yeah,
The
that's funny.
Simpsons predicted everything that happened over the past 20 years.
I know.
Very
It's genius, and being a little bit of a dabbler in screenwriting and production myself, it's remarkable that they've basically kept that same team together for what it must be 2,000 episodes by now.
well. They were churning out episodes when I was in elementary school, and
Yeah,
I'm
I
now
know.
43 years old.
I know, and it's basically the same people still doing it.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about that later. We're not here to talk about Homer Simpson. I have
Yeah.
some criticism on how they handle that character, but hey,
All
look,
right.
back to our business. So, uh, the way I'm gonna summarize the first few episodes. Episode one, if we're starting on October 7th of last year, coming up on the anniversary, launches unprecedented attack on civilians by the Iranian-based Hamas. State of shock for the Israelis. Takes them a long time to get their act together, as you would expect after such a horrific attack, right? They get their act together. Um, they eventually do the right strategic move, which is go and dissect Gaza into two pieces and bombard it up to Timbuktu. At this point, Hamas is gone. Gaza, I don't think the Israelis are not going to be boots on the ground there for the next 2 decades at least, until they can figure out what to do with it. So that episode, I think, is pretty much over. They have to get the hostages out. I don't know if there's anybody to negotiate with, to be honest.
That's the
Mm.
thing. They have to get the cost hostages out, and they have to either get Sinwar or prove that he's
I don't
dead.
think he's alive.
No, that's what I'm saying. But they're gonna have to. I agree with you, but they're gonna
Somebody
have to
needs to
show
call
that.
the shot. I
Yeah,
think he's dead.
yeah, I think so too. Actually,
I think the reason they can't negotiate because I think there's no shot callers. Because the guys overseas, they don't make any decisions. Like the Khalid Marshals and all the other guys, they're just puppets. So that episode is basically over.
well, and just sorry, I know we got a delay, but just one other point on Sinwar. Even if he's alive, it's pretty clear that he's not able to communicate with anybody outside of his bunker or wherever he is
Yeah.
if he's alive. So that would explain it too.
Even if he is alive, the chain of command is gone. The
Yeah.
infrastructure is gone. I don't know. I think mostly what ends up happening with the whatever's fighting force remaining, they're just gonna slowly blend in back into the civilian population and fade
Yeah.
away. Now that story is on, let's call it, on management of an active conflict kind of situation. So I don't think it's ever going to be quiet over there for these guys. They've started a new front. Well, they haven't started, but they've actively went in after a year of absorbing a lot of damage. Went into the north, took out Hezbollah a lot quicker than I could ever predict, even in most, I think, absolutely wildest kind of positive scenarios. I don't think they could. I don't think anybody expected such a crippling kind of impact Hezbollah is basically at this point. I don't know what's left of them, but they're still a fighting force. But I mean, it's not the same Hezbollah we were thinking about, just a couple of weeks ago. And now it seems that Iran is trying to save whatever's left of the Shiite Revolutionary Front in the Middle East. The big question is, having gone and basically launched missiles, we had confirmation just minutes before we went live from the Israeli IDF spokesperson, and confirming that there were hits on several Air Force bases by the Iranian attack. So that will have to be that warrants a response. I don't think anybody expects the Israelis not to respond harshly. I think the response is coming. So the question to you, Brian, is where do you speculate the response is going to hit the Iranians? Not where you wish, but I think where you expect that to happen. And what would be the Iranian response, right? Because I think that they have a lot of options, right? So how do you predict the next two chess moves? I mean, the Israeli response and the Iranian response to the response.
Well, first of all, I have a riddle for you, Tom. How do you identify the next Hezbollah commander?
I don't have the slightest idea.
He's dead.
Yeah, most likely.
Yeah, that's not good job security, that job. Although somebody posted a pretty funny meme about the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, that said, or no, sorry, not him. The former guy, Jeremy Corbyn, who's very sympathetic to Hamas and Hezbollah. And it shows him answering a phone, and the meme is, "Hello, it's the Hezbollah HR department. We have a position opening for you." Anyway.
Well, Jeremy Corbyn is not, I don't think is relevant.
No. But I thought it was funny. So here's,
who moves ahead. So
yeah,
Israel and then Iran.
So I don't want to be too specific, but also it's very, very hard to tell, right? Because the enemy gets a vote no matter what your battle plan is. But what I believe is likely, more likely than not, let's say, is that the next strike, and I don't call it a retaliation because in the laws of war, that's not really a thing. What Israel's mission is against the mullahs in Iran is two types of deterrence. One is specific deterrence, or tactical deterrence, you could say. In other words, taking out the actual capabilities that the mullahs used to launch their attack a few days ago. But much more importantly is strategic deterrence, which is not only taking out the capabilities, but convincing the mullahs, convincing your enemy that they should never do it again. And so I think that the response is going to be much stronger than it was back in April. So remember, in April, one of the things that Israel did, and or the United States did, is took out the S-400 Russian-made Freudian slip, Russian-made S-400 air defenses right around the city of Natanz. And most people may know
that's Natanz, the most advanced air defense system in the world right now, right?
Yeah, but it's absolutely no match for an F-35 or certainly not an F-22. And in fact, I think the Israel Navy just took one out on the coast of Syria with just ship-launched missiles. So it's no match for the U.S. forces, and it's no match for the Israeli forces either. So what that message that Israel was trying to send to the mullahs back in April was, hey, we can take out your most advanced air defenses in the same city that your nuclear program has a lot of activity, and you'll literally never know what hit you. And I guarantee you, they still don't know. They don't know if it was an F-22. They don't know if it was submarine launched. They don't know if it was an Israeli aircraft. They have no idea. So they really don't know what to expect. And on top of that, their what we call in intelligence circles, their decision loop is completely disrupted. And that is always a very important thing. So I'm not even convinced that the mullahs have the sort of mental ability, and by that I don't mean they're stupid, although they might be stupid also, but they're so rattled it's going to be really hard to make a rational decision. Plus their communications are probably massively disrupted through cyber attacks and other things. So I think what'll happen, and apparently the interwebs thinks it's going to happen imminently. I don't know. I think there's a lot of signs that would suggest that it probably is going to happen in darkness, either tonight or tomorrow night. But one thing Israel is brilliant at is tactical surprise. The mullahs know they're going to get hit. They don't know when. So one way of thinking about it is if military and intelligence people think that this is the most likely time to strike, maybe Israel says, okay, that's a time not to strike, and we'll do it when they're not expecting it. But I still would say more likely than not, it happens in the next 24 to 48 hours. So what will they hit? I don't want to be too specific there, but I would just say there's a couple of different target sets that I guarantee you are already loaded in to the Israeli targeting systems and the American and allied targeting systems. And I think of that kind of in 3 layers. So they definitely will have to hit all of the infrastructure they can find that enabled the ballistic missile attacks from a couple days ago. So launchers, housing of launch crews, places where they store the missiles, places where they store the launchers, places where they manufacture the stuff. They'll hit all that. But
So
they're
you
not.
think it's possible they'll hit the nuclear program?
I'm almost gonna get to that. So that's
Okay.
layer 1. Layer 2 is, I would say, strategic targets to either, well, probably weaken the infrastructure that supports the military and the IRGC in general. So oil refineries, communication systems are going to get hit, I think, so that they can't organize a response and they can't rally their whatever tiny percent of their people that are pro-regime. And then possibly other infrastructure targets, like manufacturing facilities for weapons other than what were used the other night. And then, of course, at the top of that pyramid, and also ships at sea. So one of the things that's been reported is that a lot of the Iranian warships, the regime warships, are leaving their ports and going out to sea. And people will remember in history, the thing that saved the U.S. Navy at Pearl Harbor during the Second World War was that most of our aircraft carriers were not in port. They were out at sea. But this is not 1942, 41. And Israel has the benefit of the global intelligence collection systems of the U.S. and our allies. So if Israel wants to hit those warships that are at sea, being at sea is not going to stop them. I really hope they hit those 2 IRGC spy ships that are used to support things like the Houthi attacks and all that. But then at the top of the pyramid, of course, is their nuclear infrastructure. Now, no one knows, at least no one will talk about it, hopefully, how detailed Israel and America's knowledge is about where everything is. Certainly, much of it is buried deep, deep, deep under mountains. So there's no way short of a nuclear strike, which is not going to happen, or regime change, or invading the country and taking over, that they will get everything. But they don't have to get everything. All they have to get are, one, the people that are key to that program, which Israel, I believe, has been doing for a long time, but I'm sure there's more people. And then importantly, all of the infrastructure that they can find that supports the program. If we in Israel have enough intelligence to know where the actual nuclear material is, I don't think we would hit that, because that is a severe risk of essentially nuking, the region. Although if Iran has a weapon or weapons, and if they used a safe design, which is a big if, they shouldn't be able to be set off by just a strike on them. That shouldn't happen. But you could have a lot of nuclear material, radioactive material, that's released into the atmosphere. So I think if we know where that stuff is, we'll stay away from it. But what we and Israel will do, if that decision is made, is to try to take out not only the people, but the infrastructure. So the above ground facilities where the offices and the plans and stuff are. I'm sure they have a lot of plans stored underground too. And if Israel really is serious about it, they'll use those bunker busting weapons to try to get at the command and control, the communications, and the non-actual nuclear material, the nuclear material, the radioactive material, if it's there. There's a lot of what I think is political theater going on, where Biden is saying one thing and Bibi saying another thing. I don't believe it for a fucking second. I think it's all completely coordinated. I think it's strategic deception. And I think the U.S. and Israel have already agreed on whether or not to strike nuclear facilities. Now, that doesn't mean I'm saying it's going to happen. But if it doesn't happen, it's not because the U.S. stopped Israel. It's because they agreed it wasn't the right thing to do.
Having said that, so let's play a little
Well, the
simulation
response,
game.
yeah.
Yeah. So let's say that they do so. By the way, shout out to the 1,007 people in the stream. We've never had these sort of numbers on this channel before.
Welcome,
And
everybody.
yeah, welcome and thank you for showing up. So let's say Israel carries out some variation of what you have just described, right? What would be the Iranian response to the response in that case? Because they're not going to
Well,
stay silent, right?
there's two. I think there's two major things to consider. I mean, first of all, the only honest answer is nobody can get in the minds of the mullahs, so who knows?
Yep.
And also, we don't know how reliable in a situation like this the Iranian military will be. I mean, obviously, the IRGC controls a lot of the most important military assets, but they still have to have pilots and soldiers and other people to follow orders, people that are sitting on missile launchers. So we don't know about the reliability of them if they really think the regime's in danger. So that's one X factor that we can't really assess. But if the mullahs are thinking rationally, which again could be a big if, then I think it depends entirely on how severe and how successful the attack by Israel and their allies is. I mean, if they focus on command and control and communications and intelligence facilities, as I suggested a minute ago, it's going to be pretty difficult to mount any kind of a response for quite some period of time, especially since, and this is why I think a very strong attack has become much more likely. Hezbollah seems to be more or less crippled right now. I think the
For the same reasons you
regime,
just pointed out.
yeah, I think the mullahs always felt they could restrain Israel because Israel had to worry about Hezbollah launching a massive attack on the north. And I don't think Israel thinks that right now. Now, they could be wrong, but you knocked out 3,000 of their folks with the pager attacks. They took out every leader they have. They took out the councils, including the IRGC reps that were supposed to be making the decisions. They've taken out thousands of launchers and God knows how many missiles. So it's not that Hezbollah doesn't have capability. I'm sure they still do. But the ability to use it right now, I think, is severely constrained. So that's why I think the attack will be bigger than a lot of people think.
You
What?
think, here's the question for you. This is a very important question. I was dying to ask you this. And when we spoke offline, I forgot. So, do you think that the Iranian strike, as it happened a few days ago, did not happen in a completely saturation-oriented attack in which Iran fires a couple hundred rockets, Hezbollah fires a couple hundred rockets, the Houthis fire a couple of rockets, maybe even a few from the militia up north? The reason it didn't happen like that Hezbollah, Iran, and the Houthis all attacked simultaneously, is because they couldn't or because they didn't want to? That's the big question I want to ask you.
Yeah. So let me answer that in two parts. They did try that in April. The Houthis and not so much Hezbollah, but the Houthis and the Iranian regime fired simultaneously, and that got them absolutely nowhere. It was completely, I think, 99.9% defeated by Israel and the U.S. and our allies. So I don't think Israel's terribly worried about that, especially with Hezbollah kind of off the board. But the way I would reframe that question is the way that a lot of propagandists are talking about it. This theory somehow that the Iranian regime, that the mullahs specifically kind of pulled their punch and did not send as much as they could have because they really didn't want to hurt anyone. They just wanted to send a message. I don't know what the rules are profanity on your show. I think that's total bullshit
We
and
don't have rules. You
disinformation.
can swear
Okay,
away.
very good.
If you have kids watching this show, you're an idiot. And this
well,
is
and,
not the kids show.
and they probably already left the room to go play video games or VR. But I think that was a real attack. I think when you fire 180 ballistic missiles, you're trying to get through the defenses and destroy people and destroy infrastructure. Now, the mullahs want to claim, well, we were only aiming at, IDF or Mossad facilities, but 180 ballistic missiles is an awful lot to try to take out a few military targets. I think they wanted to do that, but I think they also wanted to kill a bunch of Israeli civilians. So this idea that they didn't really try, I think, is complete BS. And from a laws of war and a war crimes standpoint, it doesn't matter that Israel and the U.S. and others were able to shoot down, again, 99% of those missiles. What matters is the enemy intended to do. And I think they intended to kill people and do a lot of damage. So just to finish answering on the response, one, depending on the Israeli and allied action, I'm not sure they'll be able to respond in any significant way for a period of time. And two, they've shown themselves to be remarkably slow and I would say toothless in their response. They'll send the Ayatollah out to make a bunch of fiery speeches, but I really don't think they'll be able to do anything for a while. And whether they do anything at all, I think depends on how successful the strikes are.
So if I'm reading between the lines, you're saying if they could have, they would have used Hezbollah in a coordinated attack, but the capability was not there.
That's what I think. Or maybe equally likely, as you suggested earlier, the entire command and control chain is broken. There's nobody to give orders to. They can't keep a new Hezbollah leader alive for literally 5 minutes. And as we learned when we fought Al Qaeda, it's very, very difficult to plan attacks when there's missiles falling on your head.
So you don't think the Iranians are trying to delay an all-out war to have it on their terms, which means with the nuke already in hand?
Well, look, I would repeat what I started with. It's impossible to get into the minds of the mullahs in Tehran, and it's always dangerous for Westerners to try to think like their enemy if you're not like deeply ingrained in the culture and the history. So I'm not probably the right person to know that, but I would say that I think that well, no, let me remind myself of your question. I don't think they're delaying all-out war until they have a nuclear weapon because then they would have just done nothing. They wouldn't have fired 180 ballistic missiles at Israel.
Yeah.
Because they have to know. They have to know that there's a significant possibility that their nuclear facilities will be hit as a result. So they're basically risking not a total destruction of the program, but a delay of another 10 or 20 years if Israel and the U.S. decide to do that.
Do you think that would you define the Iranian leadership as a rational decision making, or a mixture of? I mean, it's a very hard question. I know, but do you think they're a rational player the way we define it?
I think it's impossible to know. I think that so far they don't act like people who think the apocalypse is coming and they need to go meet their 72 virgins right away. They act like people that want to stay alive. So for now, I would say they're rational, but that could change at any time, or we could have it wrong.
So Brian, what do you think about the French president taking the opposite side of this trade all of a sudden? So my question is, not obviously it's a despicable move, but what do you think politically he's trying to get here with kind of flipping sides?
Yeah, and this is another thing that I'm not an expert in is French thinking, but I suspect it has a lot to do with the fact that Lebanon was a French colony for a very long period of time, and they still have close, at least cultural ties, if nothing else. And Macron is actually very hawkish and aggressive on Ukraine. Of course, that's almost right next door to France, so it's a lot more strategic to them. And he's been generally speaking, pretty supportive of Israel, although he spews the same bullshit as a lot of Western leaders about the, supposed war crimes in Gaza by Israel. But he's basically been supportive of what they're doing. So I think a change like this, to me, the only thing that's really changed is that Lebanon is now in play. And just given France's history with Lebanon, that would be my guess. The other thing is he could be of the generation of leaders. And I think, in our country, Biden and Blinken and Sullivan are this, that just are overly terrified about a nuclear war, a global nuclear war. Of course, no one wants that. It would probably mean the end of humanity for the most part. But I think that there's the set of leaders in the West right now are too concerned about that. Because I think for sure Putin's been bluffing the whole time. And I don't actually think Iran has a deliverable weapon right now. And here's the other thing. For sure, for sure, even if there was a nuclear exchange, God forbid, between the Iranian regime and Israel, Russia will not be there to back them up. They're not going to back up Iran in something like that. And whatever Iran has, they don't have the capability to threaten the human race like Russia and China do.
There's a theory, by the way. I want to give a. I didn't know this feature existed, but thank you for donating 5 memberships, which is pretty cool. Really appreciate it.
What does that do? What is that? That's very cool.
I
But
think
does
what
that
it does, yeah, it's very cool. I didn't know this feature. I think what it does, random 5 people from the chat will be selected and given like access to the paid membership on the
do? Oh,
channel.
that's awesome.
That's very cool. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I didn't even know we had that feature, but nice to know. So, given the
By the way, I'm
given
not really looking at the chat, but I just noticed somebody is actually in Iran. So I hope you're being safe in the way you're on the internet, and I'm glad you're with us, and our prayers are with you.
I've been shocked to meet a lot of Iranian people who are very bullish on an Israeli attack, which is weird to hear. But
Well, one of the few ways, my understanding is one of the most common ways that regime opponents inside Iran show their protest is by graffiti. And there have been a lot of reports that there's been like straight up pro-Israel graffiti lately. So that's a very bold move inside a police state.
so, do you think there's any chance? Obviously, everything is a spectrum, right? Is there any chance that the chain of events that have started that's going to cause an Israeli reaction, an Iranian counter reaction, an Israeli counter reaction, and so forth, and the obvious escalation? Do you think that might jeopardize the existence of the Iranian regime in any way, or is it stretching it a little bit too far?
Well, that's the $1 million question, right? Or $1 billion or $1 trillion question. And I guess I forgot to say this before. I think there's also a target set that the Israel and the US and our allies have that specifically is intended to weaken the political power of the regime. And this would be things like obviously targeting leadership, but also targeting communications, targeting the headquarters of their media companies, and things like that, infrastructure that are not intended to kill people other than the leadership, but are intended to make the people of Iran who are opposed to the regime believe that the regime can fall. And one of the things you know as well as I, Tom, is once you show enough cracks in the aura of inevitability and supreme power of a dictatorship, they can fall very fast. I mean, the entire Soviet Union and the Russian communist government and the Eastern European governments, as you know, fell extremely fast in the early 90s, late 80s, once people came to believe that the Russians and the East German intelligence services couldn't actually control the country.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. There's a reason that Putin's regime is not in jeopardy, and that reason is because he is extremely popular in Russia. A popular king tends to outlive the unpopular king, right? The IRGC are not enjoying a huge amount of popularity back home. I think they're like 30% of the people hate them, 30% love them, and 30% don't care. So pretty much 65% of the people are not really that supportive of the IRGC. So an unpopular king, even in the dictatorship, monarchy, whatever you call it, usually doesn't bode well for an unpopular regime. So all it needs is a nudge. As I remember this vividly from late 80s.
Yeah.
And so forth.
I mean, one of the questions, just having been a CIA officer, that I really think about a lot, and I don't have any power to do anything about it right now, but is whether and to what extent the West should be involved in covertly, meaning secretly, supporting resistance elements inside the country. Just to be clear, I have no knowledge of any of this. I don't have a security clearance. I'm just raising an issue.
Yeah.
And the reason I raise it is that back in 2009, when, in my opinion, the Obama administration made a huge mistake by not only not supporting resistance.
It's been
Huh?
documented. What you're
Yeah.
saying has been documented.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is, I think they made a huge mistake by not supporting the resistance. But I've had folks in the Iranian diaspora tell me over the years that the worst thing that could happen, and I don't know if I agree with this, I'm just saying I've been told this by people that don't live in Iran, but they're Persian, that the last thing they need is for the regime, the mullahs, to be able to prove that somehow the resistance movement inside the country is not organic, because they're obviously going to claim that it's all like being run by Israel and the US. And so we don't want to give any evidence to show that that might be true. So the thing I wrestle with is, for people in the West who want to help, including governments, what's the best way to help? And not, like the Hippocratic Oath for doctors says, first do no harm. So if we want to help hasten the demise of that regime, what is the best thing for us to do? And there's a million different opinions about that, but I think it's an interesting question.
Do you think the U.S. response to the last few moves by the IRGC and in general the players in that neighborhood have been satisfactory? Because in my personal opinion, I feel like it was a little bit passive, and I
So
feel that passiveness is driving more and more emboldened the players to do really nasty stuff.
So there's two ways to think about it. I guess there's, first of all, there's rhetoric and then there's action. And I believe that the current administration's rhetoric, political speech, has been pretty insufficient, both in terms of calling for the release of the hostages in Israel, in Gaza, but also in terms of speaking out against the mullahs in Tehran. Now, how much it matters what the U.S. president says, I don't know. But I wish they had been more forceful in their words. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, kind of to the point I was just making, the question becomes, you know, are we not doing more in public because, Blinken and Sullivan and to some extent Biden still somehow think they're going to resurrect the ridiculous, I think horribly mistaken JCPOA, the nuclear deal. Harris, by the way, has already said she won't, but she's not in power. Or are we coordinating our actions with Israel? Because the other thing is, in my opinion, it is not in Israel's interest to have the U.S. visibly, provably be doing a lot of the military work, for the same reason we were just talking about with not doing so much inside the country, because the narrative, Putin's disinformation narrative, the mullah's disinformation narrative, is going to be that Israel can't defend itself and they're the West puppet and the U.S. is running everything. So the last thing we want to do is show that that's the case. So I guarantee you, a lot more of the defense in April was done by the United States than the world knows. And a lot more of the defense and possibly the offensive moves in whatever the response is by Israel is also going to be done and certainly enabled by the United States and our intelligence services. So you could argue it both ways. I think they
Yeah,
should have
but
been more
Brian,
forceful, but I see the other side of it.
look, you know this famous thing. I don't remember which who the quote belongs to, and I apologize in advance for being an illiterate fuck. But I've remembered it vividly. Justice should not only be served; it should be
Swift.
seen.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, it should be
Swift.
seen. It should be visible, visual. It needs to. It has basically justice. Also, is a 50% PR, right? Uh, so the fact is, the layman that's watching the PR statements coming out and the actions of the administration, I don't think the US is projecting power or has been projecting power, including Donald Trump, by the way, in his term as well. Same problem. If you go back to the Obama days, all the way from the Obama days to present time, the US has not been projecting strength in the Middle East. And I think that created the vacuum, and that vacuum birthed Hezbollah and the Houthis and the Iranian just emboldened response, to just literally just fire rocket unthinkable things, right? Houthis blockading the Suez Canal, like crazy stuff. I mean, I think the U.S. has not been policing that part of the world as hard as they were before the Obama days. And I
Yeah, I
think the
think
problem is that this administration has the same sickness that let's share the neighborhood kind of mentality, which is a stupid strategy in my opinion.
well, I think I agree with you on that point. I think there's
And I will
two.
say Trump was,
Yeah.
people forget, but that shameful images we've seen from other parts of the world is a Trump project. So people forget that.
So I think the two biggest enablers of this third global conflict that we're in, the two things that gave the green light to the dictators are one, when Obama whispered to Medvedev that once he gets reelected, he can work more with Putin, and that came out. I think that was a green light, and I think even more of a green light. So there's three. I forgot. There's three. More of a green light was when Obama, for months, said if Syria uses poison or chemical weapons or weapons of mass destruction again against their own people, the U.S. will respond militarily. We went to the UN and got a resolution. He went to Congress and got authority for it. He sent poor John Kerry all around the world lobbying for support. And then all of a sudden, and of course, then Assad did it a bunch more times. And then one day he's just like walking around the Rose Garden with his national security advisor and just goes, nah, we're just kidding. I mean, I'm being facetious, but I think that also was a green light to dictators. And then I think one of the absolute worst things, which Biden and Trump share blame for, but I think Trump shares more blame for. Well, four things actually. So Trump killed Soleimani. I thought the targeted killing, I thought that was very good. I said it at the time. But then Iran went ahead and attacked more U.S. bases and hurt more U.S. service people, and they did nothing after that. So that was bad. But the worst thing, I think, historically is going to turn out to be when Trump went, hat in hand on bended knee to the mullahs in Afghanistan, the same effing people who allowed bin Laden and Al Qaeda to attack the United States on 9/11, 2001, and who tried to protect bin Laden for as long as they could. The same people, the Taliban, a designated terror organization. And Trump went there on, not physically, but he went to them on bended knee. And not only did he negotiate our unilateral surrender in that conflict, but he didn't even allow the Afghan government that was in charge any part in the negotiations. He got 5,000 Taliban terrorists released from prison, and he agreed that we would completely pull out. Now, as I've said many times, then Biden turned around and botched the whole goddamn thing in a way that was just incredibly bad decision making. But Trump,
I think it was shameful.
Yeah, shameful. But Trump is the person who put it in motion. And Trump, even now on the campaign, says, oh, well, I know I can control everything and everyone will be safe because the mullahs in Afghanistan called me Your Excellency. And that's the problem with Trump, is you can flatter him like Putin did, like Kim Jong-un did, like the mullahs in Afghanistan did, and get him to do what you want. That's a straight up intelligence play, is flattering the guy on the one hand and then triggering him on the other hand, like Harris did in the debate. So the point is,
well, she did the opposite. She triggered him into an argument he didn't have to take.
Right. That's what I'm saying is a narcissist like Trump,
crowd sizes.
Any good psychologist or intelligence officer knows how to make a person like that do what they want, sometimes with flattery, sometimes with insults. Anyway, my point is, I think all those four things gave the green light to Putin and the other dictators to do, thinking they can do what they want. And I think whoever is the next president of the United States has to do something very dramatic to break that cycle.
Yeah, that's a good summary. I think that prior to Obama and post Obama, it's a different Putin, and he drives the bus, because in that little group he's the shot caller, right? Even though he has been subjugated to China lately because of the energy stuff and the sanctions, he is still kind of the main shot caller. And with him losing fear, post Obama, it was a completely different Putin. Because if you recall, back in the old days, he was trying to get into NATO. Remember that stuff? He was trying to
Yeah.
get into NATO.
Oh yeah.
He wasn't trying to beef.
Yeah. Now I mean, you would know this better than I do. It's hard without going back and studying it to know how much of the change in Putin, or at least the public change in Putin, showing his real personality, had to do with internal events in Russia versus what Obama and the West did. But for sure, allowing Crimea to go unanswered and pulling out of our threat to Syria, and his comments to Medvedev that got caught on a hot mic are a big part of it. So I tend to think Putin, who was a career KGB thug, was not showing his real self when he was trying to be nice to the West. He just didn't feel powerful enough to be his real self. But for sure, what Obama did contributed to it. But let me address something. I'm sort of occasionally glancing over at the chat, and I'm about to get cataract surgery. So next time you see me, I probably won't have glasses. But right now, very hard to read stuff. So I think I saw somebody post a talking point that Russia has been pushing around the world, and unfortunately, some of our politicians in the U.S. have, which is this notion that the Trump deal that he made with the mullahs, terrorists in Afghanistan, was conditional, and that Biden came in and didn't follow the conditions. Well, kind of. Yes, there was an agreement that we would keep 2,500 troops in the country that was not going to be anywhere close enough to allow us to do what we needed to do there. But none of those conditions would have prevented the Taliban, the terrorists, from retaking the country. That was the deal, is whatever these small conditions were, the quid pro quo for it was the Taliban gets to overthrow the Afghan government and they get to keep the weapons. So I mean, the deal that Trump made was better than, I mean, it could have been worse, but it for sure, without anything Biden ever did, led to the Taliban taking power again, which led to thousands of terrorists flowing into the country again, who are for sure sitting around figuring out how they can attack the United States and Israel and Saudi Arabia and the West, and doomed generations of Afghan girls and women to sex slavery and no education and just miserable lives. And that has nothing to do with Biden. That's the deal Trump made. That would have happened even if Biden hadn't botched the withdrawal.
I think the primal sin was the idea that you can negotiate with the terrorist.
Of course.
That's a misunderstanding of the Middle East.
Sorry to interrupt. By the way, for all of my pro-Israel friends, and I think I've proven to be about as pro-Israel as any Episcopalian on X, and for all of our friends inside Iran, I don't know if anyone noticed, but on September 25th on international TV, you can go find this clip, Trump said he wanted to make a deal with the mullahs in Iran. And I promise you, whatever anyone thinks about what he did in his first term, if he tries to make a deal with them and they do what I was saying earlier, flatter him, maybe decide that it would be a great idea to have a Trump Tower in Tehran, he will flip because he's completely transactional. He just does what he thinks is best for him at any given moment.
To his credit, the Abraham Accords was his thing, and there was a killer idea. It was good enough for the Biden administration to keep it on, which is insane.
I've said this many times in public. That's how you know it was a great idea, because normally when the White House changes parties, the first thing the new person does is get rid of everything the last
kill
guy
everything,
did. And they kept the Abraham Accords. But I will say, even that, and again, can't take anything away from it, absolute genius, major strategic policy change for the United States that I think in the end is going to be very beneficial. And one of the ways you know it's going to be beneficial is that I think there's absolutely no doubt that the reason why the mullahs in Tehran greenlit the October 7th, 2023 genocidal is because they were trying to derail the Abraham Accords. That's how you know it's a good idea. But I will also
they delayed it.
Yeah, they delayed it. But I will also say that there was a lot in that deal for the Trump family too. In terms of commerce in Saudi Arabia, in terms of future development. So
of course there was.
And by the way, I don't actually care if American president does the right thing. I don't care what their reasons are.
Yeah. Well, in we have this idea like Russian people, like we understand, right? If you steal 30% and you do 70% good, we're fine with it. That's just the cost of doing business, you know.
And by the way, that was the operating philosophy of the first
Yeah.
American president I worked for, Reagan. He very famously said, "Listen, if I'm negotiating with somebody and they agree with me on 80% of what I believe, I'm going to let the other 20% go because I'd
Yeah.
rather have success on the 80%."
By the way, I'm a huge Reagan fan.
Me
I
too.
didn't know you used to work under him.
Oh
I
yeah.
forgot. Yeah.
I joined the Central Intelligence Agency when Reagan was president. That's how old I am.
So you were in the agency when the wall fell down, right?
Not when the wall fell down. So I left to go to law school in '87,
Okay, so just
and so
before.
I was out of government, but I was there when we, the CIA, did, I think, the most important thing to destroy the Soviet Union, which was arm and support the Mujahideen in Afghanistan that led to Russia having to leave Afghanistan. I was there for that. And that was, at the time, one of the most highly classified things in the US government. And I think it's also one of the most successful things. Another thing that
That
helped.
that war bankrupt the USSR.
Exactly. Yeah. And they had to go
That
home.
and Chernobyl. That
Yeah.
Chernobyl was
Yeah, we should do a whole show on that sometime because I know you got a lot of
yeah.
expertise in that.
I think Chernobyl plus Afghanistan is impossible for economically. It was over.
And also what Reagan did, essentially tricking the Soviets into believing that we had this Star Wars space defense system. So they had tens of millions of rubles trying to match it, and we didn't even have it at the time. But the other thing
By
that
the
is,
way, I have to tell you something. As much as we are fanboying, there's a word for this for the kids. They're called standing, right? Stan. But
oh
we are
really?
fanboying over Reagan. Yeah, I think Gorbachev deserves a lot of credit
Yeah,
because he made the
absolutely.
decision. He made a decision that was pure humanitarian decision, avoiding bloodshed, because he basically said, "Look, we're not going to win this. Just people going to die for nothing. So let's just pull the plug right now." That's not the decision that a Soviet leader that I can think of would have made any of his predecessors.
And he risked his life to do it. So I
Yep.
completely agree with that. But just one more
And
thing
he
I want to
became the
say.
most hated person in Russia to this day. To
I
this
know.
day.
I know. I know. I'm sure they've tried to assassinate him many times. But
You
here's
know,
the other
Putin
thing.
didn't go to his funeral.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that.
Yeah.
But here's the other thing that was happening in the agency when I was there that I really believe did help bring down the Soviet Union on top of the three things that we've talked about. And this was super highly classified at the time, but it's public information now. One of the first major cracks in the Soviet Empire and the Warsaw Pact in Eastern Europe was when Poland, which was a complete Soviet puppet at the time, when their dock workers, led by their future president Lech Walesa, rose up and started to destabilize the government. That entire operation, including the Pope supporting it, was engineered by Reagan and the Pope in secret and was part of a CIA operation.
Well, a lot would be said also about Ukraine. I mean, that also was. There's a lot of evidence coming out from a lot of these color revolutions, but that's a. I mean, nobody's a saint. Nobody's perfect. It's a dirty game. Let me ask you a question, Brian.
Yeah,
Going
but
back to
let me just hold on. Let me just say one thing about that. Whatever happened inside of Ukraine before February of 2022 was absolutely no justification whatsoever for the genocidal invasion.
Oh no, I'm not saying that. But
I
I'm
just
saying
want to make it clear.
the Maidan Square. There's a lot of fingerprints on it. That's not Ukrainian. Hey, there's recordings of Victoria Nuland. Come on,
I've been out of government for almost.
Did you hear
20
the
years.
recordings of Victoria Nuland talking? Never mind. Okay, never mind. There's a lot of nobody's perfect. This is a dirty game, but I like my team to play dirty and win. So
well, and
look,
I would also say I'm really not going to comment on that, but I would say that I don't actually see anything wrong with what I believe to be the greatest democracy in the world, helping other people who are oppressed try to get freedom. I got no problem with that.
It's my team or the other team, whatever it takes. I'd like my team to win, and I'm not apologetic about it. I'm not a tree hugger. So here's a question for you, Brian. Going back to the Middle East, important question. We have 5 minutes left. I want to use these 5 minutes smartly. So Abraham Accords without October 7th happening would have been by this point already a done deal.
Yeah.
And even MBS publicly stated that it was already happening within a matter
Yeah.
of weeks. So the Iranian orchestrated attack on Israel uh, happens as a means to stop that process from happening. It obviously delays it, but A, do you think it is beyond repair? Or do you think we're still heading there? Or maybe you are of the opinion that because of the developments over the past couple of weeks, in which the Israelis have kind of retake.
Oh, you froze. I bet I'm frozen too. I think the Russians wanted to kill this podcast. Oh, people can still hear me? I'm watching the chat to see. All right. Well, I'm just going to keep talking then until Tom comes back. No, I think the Abraham Accords now is absolutely inevitable, and I think it will happen very, very quickly after the. Just laughing at the frozen picture of Tom. I think it'll happen very, very quickly after the conclusion of the current conflict between Israel and the mullahs and their proxies, and I think it will happen no matter who's the next U.S. president. And I think it's going to completely transform the Middle East. Now Tom is entirely gone. Can you guys still hear me? This is hilarious. I just hijacked Tom's podcast. I just let a hostile takeover of Tom's podcast. I think we were supposed to end in a couple minutes anyway, but now that Tom's gone, I can plug my own shit. So he was going to do this anyway. I'm just kidding. I think somewhere in the post. Oh, here he comes. I just took over your podcast for 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's shocking to me that I've been gone for a few minutes and nobody left. That's just incredible to me. So I was about to complete my question, and I don't know how much of it you already started to answer, but basically the question was, do you think that the deal is off, which I don't think so also, or do you think it's in the same level of desirability for all parties, or do you think that the recent actions of the Israelis reclaiming the neighborhood bully status perhaps even now make the deal more attractive for the Saudis, given the Iranian behavior and the Israeli kind of new standing in the region?
So I think it helps, but I also think, as I said when you were gone, it's absolutely inevitable, and it doesn't matter who the next U.S. president is. My bet is we can come on and talk about this in a year. My bet is that by this time next year, no matter who gets elected president of the U.S., no matter who's the prime minister of Israel, that deal will be done with the Saudis. And once the Saudis make the deal, everyone who's left will make the deal, and they're the most important anyway. And I would also say that that would be the single greatest FU that the world could send to the mullahs in Iran and to their Russian allies. The second most biggest FU, though, has already happened, and that is, ironically, Putin invaded Ukraine partly because he didn't want Ukraine to get closer to NATO. And what does he have now? He has Sweden and Finland as members of NATO. So that's a huge FU, but I think the Abraham Accords would be even a bigger one to Iran and to Russia.
Do you think there is a path to the switching gears a little bit to end the Ukraine war in a way that's desirable for the West, or do you think it's going to end up with some sort of a deal that's going to be more along the lines of he gets to keep Eastern Ukraine and everybody goes home?
I think that does entirely depend on the U.S. election. I think it's absolutely irrefutable now. We can go into that sometime on another podcast, but I think it's absolutely crystal clear that if Trump is elected, he will give
He'll
Eastern
make that deal.
Ukraine
Yeah,
to Putin.
he'll make that deal.
For 100% sure.
Yeah.
And I think a huge part of the reason that Zelensky went into Russia itself was at least he's got something to bargain with. But I think Russia will keep everything they have right now if Trump gets elected. If Harris gets elected, I think that, I suppose the quote unquote bad news would be the war will probably go on longer because it's not going to get won during the winter by anybody. And on the downside, on the upside, I think she will absolutely back Ukraine I think our weapons support will increase. I think we'll take the restrictions off the long-range weapons if they're not already taken off by then. And I think it'll give Ukraine a much, much, much better chance of winning the thing outright.
So you think there is a scenario where he goes home and Eastern Ukraine gets reclaimed?
Yeah.
Is there a realistic scenario? But
Yeah.
not Crimea. I mean, Crimea
Yeah.
is gone. I mean,
Yeah.
Crimea is gone.
Maybe, but you take that bridge out and you destroy the Russian air defenses in Crimea, and Ukraine has F-16s and other advanced warplanes. I don't know about that. I don't know about that. I really don't. I think Crimea is at risk unless the U.S. pulls out.
The problem with at least with Crimea and also with big parts of the Donbass, it's such a complicated topic, Brian, because ethnically Russian, being myself, I can tell you that a huge chunk of those regions are ethnically Russians, and I don't know how they come back to Ukraine in this configuration. It would be impossible for them to come back.
So that actually, I mean, I was trying to save us some time because I know we're almost done, but yes, that is a complication. So I think what would happen if Harris wins is that ultimately Ukraine would win militarily, at least everywhere but Crimea. But the Russian, the primarily ethnically Russian areas probably would get some kind of a referendum type vote. But it would only happen if the U.S. was confident that the elections would be free and fair and there was international monitors in there. But even then, I just don't think the world can tolerate rewarding superpower invading another country and taking over their territory. So, I hope if parts of Ukraine that are ethnically Russian, stay under Russian control, it's only because the people that live there have genuinely decided that they wanted to vote for it. Also, of course, a lot of those people could go back to Russia too.
It's funny. This is the life of an internet creator, right? Two comments in the comment section to wrap up the show with. There are simultaneously posted by two different users, right? Within a millisecond, right? The first one says, "That's a dumb answer. Brian is deluded." The next one, literally a millisecond later, "You guys are legends." This is the life of an internet creator.
But here's the conclusion you can reach from that, I think, Tom, and that is, love us or hate us, we're having an impact.
Hey, and look, people are look. You don't like Trump, and you obviously are not in favor of Trump winning. I prefer Trump to win, and we can have a civilized conversation about the topic and not try and kill each other. I think people in America kind of forgot that this is how things used to be before everybody went batshit crazy on social media, because social media have pumped into the young generation brain that they're in an echo chamber. They come outside, they realize there's people that don't think like them. They're shocked to find that out. They don't know how to process or deal with it or have any mental capacity to absorb any sort of disagreements, and they try to kill each other. It's insane.
Yeah. Well, yes. So in America right now, it's not enough to disagree with the other side. You really have to want to kill them. I mean, I don't, but there's tens of millions of people who, I mean, there are people who get interviewed at Trump rallies and they're asked, would you rather have Harris or Putin as your president? And they will say Putin. Like, not a few, a lot. So let me just, to be clear, because there's however many thousand people that probably haven't seen me before, let me be clear on my position on Trump, okay? First of all, I was a Republican. I mean, I worked for Reagan and I worked in the George W. Bush White House. So I was a traditional conservative Republican. On foreign policy, on domestic stuff, I'm less conservative. But what happened was that I became a never Trumper the day that Trump went into the Oval Office, kicked all of the American reporters out, and had a private meeting with the Russian foreign minister and another guy who I'm sure was the FSB, the new KGB, SVR station chief in Washington. And in that meeting, he gave away to Russian intelligence top secret Israeli intelligence. And the way we know this happened is that the Israeli government, I think this is the only time it's ever happened in history, Israel's spokesperson publicly said, we have had to adjust our intelligence sharing relationship with the United States because of what Trump did. The minute that happened, I was done with the guy way before January 6th or any of the rest of it. So I don't love Harris, and I certainly didn't love Biden, but I don't think American democracy can tolerate another Trump term with the Supreme Court giving him immunity, with all the people who actually were adults and could put some guardrails around gone. So I think one, it's going to be terrible for Ukraine and very helpful for Russia. Two, it's going to give Taiwan China the green light to do what they want to do in Taiwan. And most importantly, from an American voter, it will seriously damage American democracy. And we can have a whole show about why I think that is. But the last thing I'll say is, I don't think anyone in the world is better off. Not Israel, not the people of Iran, no one, if American democracy gets weakened. So from my point of view, if somebody is supporting Trump, they either don't really think about issues of democracy, which is fine. Like most people don't. They just care about the economy and the rest of it.
Yeah.
Or they care about American democracy, but don't really think Trump will be able to do anything to damage it. Or the worst thing is, and a lot of people at Trump rallies have said this, they think America needs a little dictatorship. And, Trump is going to be a dictator on one day. There is not a historical example of a dictator for one day. And all the people who think that Trump would be only a dictator and punish his enemies, dictators tend to punish everyone eventually. So that's my closing argument on Trump.
I want to read you the final comment of the day by Rick Anthony. He says, "Amen, Tom. That plus the media. It's not only okay to have different thoughts. I think it's a good thing how we are challenged and grow. I don't like living in an echo chamber. Creates blind spots."
Yeah.
So there you go, folks. You have a pro-Trump guy and a not really pro-Harris, but not the pro-Trump guy.
Never Trump.
I think we spoke. Yeah, exactly. So anything but Trump.
And in fact, as a matter of fact, I'll tell everybody a little secret here. In America, we're not required to say who we vote for, and a lot of people don't. But in 2016, when my choices were Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, I wrote in the name Condoleezza Rice. I could not bring myself to vote for either one of them. I wasn't a never Trumper then. That happened with the Israeli intelligence leak. But I couldn't stand the idea of either one of those people being president.
I have to ask you a question now that you've mentioned her name. So I know you worked for her, for Condoleezza Rice in the White House. I'm a huge college football fan. Is she as big of a fan as people say? Because people said she's a fanatic fan.
Unbelievable. So the National Security Advisor job is one of the most demanding jobs in the U.S. government. She probably got up usually at 4 a.m. if she hadn't been awakened by some crisis in the middle of the night. And she would work until 11, 12 o'clock, and then she'd go to some other thing. But it was just unbelievable. Like she knew every single thing. I don't know about college, but she knew every single thing about everything that was happening in the National Football League. And she has said publicly, I believe, I hope she has, this isn't classified, but I hope she said it publicly, that the dream job for her would be commissioner of the
commissioner.
NFL.
Yeah, I heard that.
And in fact, the job came open, which it very rarely does because it's an awesome job. The job came open while she was Secretary of State. And she's never said this publicly, but I believe she was probably offered the job and she decided it was more important to stay as Secretary of State. One of the many reasons I love her.
You think she could have won had she ran?
Absolutely.
100%.
Now, there would have been a significant percentage of Americans who were so opposed to the second Iraq war that they wouldn't have voted for her just because of that. But yeah. I think she would have won. I mean, I think she certainly would have beat Trump in a landslide in 2016. And I think she would have beat Obama in 2012, too, as a matter of fact. Because Romney came very, very, very close.
we should put that comment on a T-shirt and send it to Tehran.
Yeah, exactly. Hey,
Uh,
listen, this is awesome. Thanks for having me. It's always
before you go, wait, one important thing, folks. Brian has a new Patreon which he just started. He's doing a lot of cool podcasts, and he shares his insights on X. The Patreon is linked at the first line of the description for this live stream. If you enjoyed his wisdom and insights, go right ahead and subscribe to his Patreon. I believe I'm one of his first
yeah,
members, and the
yeah.
name in which I've signed up for is Generico Facero.
I love that. I love that a lot. Yeah, people, please, if you like this content, join us on our little journey. It's not very expensive. Tom will be there. We're gonna have a blast. And now Tom's frozen again. I've I've just hijacked Tom's podcast again. Amazing. All right, I'm sure Tom wanted to shut this down, and we're over time, so I'm going to shut it down for Tom, and I'm going to leave. But thank you so much, everybody. I'm sure Tom would say the same. And check out my Patreon. It's just Patreon Brian Cunningham, and hopefully we'll see you there. Have fun. Have a great weekend. Thanks.
Okay, my Mac crashed, and I'm here. I think we've lost Brian. Yeah, I think Brian has left. So I was about to put his Patreon on the screen, but then my Mac crashed in the middle of the stream. Um, but look, the Patreon page for Brian is in the. Hopefully, he'll come back to say goodbye. But the Patreon of Brian is listed in the pinned comment. Oh yeah, I'm about to say this. So yeah, sorry. Let's do the proper send off. We got to finish this right.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming back. Somebody really doesn't want you to be on the air today.
I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm just gonna.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But you did drop a
gonna
lot of
say.
truth bombs.
Okay, so can you share a little bit about what you're doing on Patreon so people can potentially check it out?
Yeah, so essentially, people probably have seen me a lot around on X, and I just got to the point where I think, first of all, there's way too many assholes. Thank you, Tom. But secondly, it's going to get much worse because apparently Musk is going to get rid of the block feature and the debate and the delete feature. So I just kind of got exhausted with it, and also I've got a couple new big research projects I'm working on. So not to lose touch with people and to be able to share my, what I think are kind of unique insights and experience. I started this Patreon account, and there's 2 tiers of membership. It's not very expensive. It's certainly less than you pay for coffee a week if you're a coffee drinker. And I think you get a lot. So we're going to have at least 2 events a week. We had a big one on Friday where I dissected the American Supreme Court, the American case, the J6 case, big new filing dropped in that. Mondays and Fridays, I think we'll probably have a news update, news politics update. And then we're going to do a lot of special events. Like we're going to have Brian's book club, which will talk about books to read. And the first one's going to be on Friday, and we're going to have a Halloween book that I'm going to recommend. Got a lot of great people already, including Tom. The only difference between what you get in the middle tier versus the top tier is you don't have access to a lot of the live chats, but you'd still get all the recordings and all that. So I think it's going to be a blast, and I hope people will sign up.
Yeah, amazing. So as the one of the first members, I congratulate you on the beginning of the Patreon journey. And for the 1,000 people that stayed here through 2 Mac crashes, an hour and 15 of ramblings about Soviet politics, I want to thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank
We
you.
love you all. Hopefully, we'll do more of these so we can show up again. If you want more of this, just hit the like button and share it so we can see that you want more of it. You guys drive the bus, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. See you next time. And you froze again. Okay. Now I'm actually going to leave. If anybody's still here, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it too.